The call came while I was unpacking boxes in my new apartment. I remember it clearly because my hands were covered in dust, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to calm. I had just returned from a 6-month work contract abroad. Exhausting, isolating, but necessary. I thought the hardest part was behind me. I was wrong. "Are you sitting down?" my cousin asked, her voice tight.
No.
"Why?" There was a pause. "Too long. Your house that's gone." I laughed at first. A short, confused sound. "What do you mean, gone?" "Sold," she said quietly. 3 weeks ago." The box slipped from my hands and hit the floor. "That's impossible," I said. "That house is in my name. Always has been." Another pause. "Your brother handled it." The world narrowed to a single sharp point in my chest. My brother.
Mark.
The golden child. The one my parents trusted with everything: finances, paperwork, decisions. The one who always said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." I didn't even remember sitting down. The house wasn't just property. It was my anchor. A downtown loft I bought at 26, after years of grinding my way up from unpaid internships and sleepless nights. It was the one thing that felt truly mine. And somehow it was gone. I confronted him that same night. Mark answered the video call with a smile, relaxed, like this was just another family check-in. "Hey," he said. "You're back already? What did you do?" I asked. His smile flickered. "What are you talking about?" "My house," I said slowly. "Why is my house listed as sold?" He sighed, actually sighed, as if I were being dramatic. "You were overseas," he said. "Things came up. It was a good deal." "A deal for who?" I asked. "For all of us," he replied smoothly. "You weren't even living there." My hands started to shake. "You didn't have my permission." "I had power of attorney," he said. "You signed it years ago. Remember?" I did remember. After our parents died, after the funeral, after weeks of paperwork and grief, Mark had slid a stack of documents across the table. "Just formal stuff," he'd said. "In case something happens." I hadn't read every page. I trusted him. "You sold my home," I said, my voice barely steady. "Without telling me." "I reinvested," he corrected. "It's smarter this way." "Where's the money?" Another pause. "It's tied up." "In what?" He leaned back, crossing his arms. "That's not really your concern right now." Something inside me broke cleanly in two. The next morning I went to the building. The front desk no longer recognized my name. The locks had been changed. A young couple stood inside, happy, excited, holding coffee cups like they belonged there. Because now they did. I walked away before they could ask questions. I spent the next week sleeping on a friend's couch, replaying every memory, every warning sign I ignored. Mark had always been charming, always confident, always just a little too comfortable making decisions for me. When I asked for documents, he delayed. When I demanded answers, he accused me of overreacting. "You're being emotional," he said. "You should be grateful." Grateful. For being erased. I contacted a lawyer. She listened carefully, then closed the folder. "This won't be easy," she said. "But if what you're saying is true, your brother crossed a line." For the first time since that phone call, I felt something other than shock. Resolve. Mark thought he'd taken my house. What he'd actually taken was my silence. And I wasn't going to stay quiet for long. Losing the house was only the beginning. Once Mark realized I wasn't letting this go quietly, things escalated fast. My access to shared accounts was cut off. Documents I'd stored in our parents' old safe were suddenly missing. Family members stopped answering my messages, not because they didn't care, but because Mark had already told his version of the story. That I was unstable. That I had agreed to everything. That I was trying to take money that wasn't mine. I became the problem. Within 2 weeks, the couch I was sleeping on became unavailable. I packed my suitcase again and booked a cheap bus ticket to another city. Not because I had a plan, but because staying felt unbearable. I told no one where I was going. For the first time in my life, I disappeared. The city I landed in didn't know my name, my history, or my family drama. It was gray, loud, and anonymous. Perfect. I rented a tiny room above a laundromat. The walls were thin, the window barely opened, and at night the smell of detergent mixed with street exhaust. I took whatever work I could find: remote contract jobs, late-night data cleanup, marketing audits for small companies that paid just enough to survive. I didn't tell clients who I used to be. I worked under a shortened version of my name. No photos. No personal details. During the day, I worked. At night, I investigated. I started with the power of attorney. I requested a copy from the notary office listed on the document. When it arrived, my stomach tightened. The signature was mine, but the scope wasn't. Several pages had been added later. Different formatting. Different timestamps. Legal language I would never have agreed to. Forgery isn't always obvious, but patterns are. I pulled bank statements next. Property records. Corporate filings tied to Mark's new investment ventures. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. The money from my loft hadn't been reinvested. It had been moved, split across shell accounts, funneled into a real estate holding company registered under a name I didn't recognize until I checked the director list. Mark's wife. The betrayal wasn't impulsive. It was planned. Weeks turned into months. I learned how to live smaller, fewer clothes, cheaper food, no unnecessary movement. Every dollar I saved went into legal consultations and data recovery services. There were nights I cried quietly into my pillow, convinced I was ruining my own life by chasing something already gone. But then I'd open my laptop and find another discrepancy. Another lie. Another thread leading back to him. That's when I realized something important. Mark didn't think I was smart enough to follow him. He thought I'd break. One evening, while scrolling through public court records, I froze. A familiar address appeared in a filing, not mine. Our parents' old home. He was leveraging it as collateral. Property he didn't fully own. Property tied to multiple heirs, including me. My hands were steady when I took screenshots. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront him again. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't warn. I would rebuild quietly. I registered a consulting entity under my full legal name, the one he thought he'd erased. I started taking higher-paying clients again, slowly, carefully, rebuilding my professional credibility without drawing attention. And I began assembling a file. Every forged document. Every illegal transfer. Every false statement. By the time Mark realized I hadn't vanished out of weakness, it would already be too late. Mark found out I was back when it was already impossible to stop me. Not because I called. Not because I warned anyone. Because my name started appearing again. A former client recognized it first. Then a journalist. Then a legal firm that had once worked with our parents. My consulting entity, the real one, under my full legal identity, began winning contracts that required background checks. Background checks don't lie. They dig. And when they dug into me, they found something else. A conflict. I returned to the city quietly. No announcements. No family visits. I checked into a small hotel near the courthouse and spent 3 days in conference rooms with my legal team. We didn't talk about revenge. We talked about leverage. The forged power of attorney. The unauthorized property sale. The shell company funneling funds through his wife. The collateral misuse of shared inheritance. It wasn't one crime. It was a system. This is bigger than a civil dispute, my lawyer said, tapping the file. This is exposure. That was the word I needed. Mark called me the night before the first filing. I almost admired his timing. "You're back," he said. Not a question. Yes. "Why are you doing this?" His voice was tight, controlled. "We could have talked." "We did talk," I replied calmly. "You told me to be grateful." Silence. "You'll destroy the family," he said finally. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "You sold my home," I said. "You did that without me." The first filing hit public records at 9:02 a.m. By noon, 2 banks froze accounts tied to his holding company. By evening, his real estate partners stopped returning calls. I didn't need to say anything. The system did it for me. I attended the mediation session in person. Mark looked older, smaller. His confidence, once effortless, now felt forced like a suit that no longer fit. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, leaning across the table. "We can settle." "I'm not here to negotiate my own theft," I replied. His lawyer avoided my eyes. Mine didn't. What Mark didn't know, what he never bothered to check, was that one of his most aggressive investors had a strict ethics clause. When the due diligence report landed on their desk, they pulled out immediately. The dominoes fell fast after that. Projects stalled. Loans were recalled. Investigations opened. Mark's image as the responsible, trustworthy son cracked publicly. Family members started calling me again. I didn't answer. The final piece came unexpectedly. A reporter reached out, not for my story, but for his. They were investigating fraudulent property transfers in the city. My documents fit perfectly. I agreed to speak. On record. The article published on a Monday morning. By Tuesday, Mark's name was everywhere. Not as a villain, as a case study. What happens when trust replaces accountability? I watched the coverage from my office, a real one this time, with floor-to-ceiling windows and my name on the lease. I didn't feel joy. I felt clarity. But the story wasn't finished yet, because there was still one thing left to do. Not legally, personally. And in the final chapter, I would decide what kind of ending this story deserved. The courthouse steps were quiet that morning. No cameras, no crowd. Just the echo of my heels against stone and the weight of everything that had led me here. Mark was already inside. By the time I took my seat, the outcome was no longer uncertain, only its shape. The evidence spoke for itself. Forged authority documents, unauthorized asset transfers, misuse of shared inheritance, a pattern too deliberate to dismiss as a mistake. When the judge finished reading the ruling, Mark didn't look at me. He stared at the table. The loft sale was declared invalid. The funds were ordered returned. His control over any shared property was revoked permanently. And then came the line that mattered most. Restitution will be paid to the plaintiff in full. I exhaled. Not in relief. In release. He stopped me in the hallway afterward. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said, his voice barely holding together. I looked at him, really looked, and saw something I hadn't expected. Fear. "You went that far the moment you decided I didn't need to know," I replied calmly. "You could have stayed," he said. "You didn't have to disappear." "I didn't disappear," I said. "You erased me. I just learned how to write myself back in." He had no answer for that. The keys arrived a week later. A small package. No note. Inside were the new keys to the loft. My loft. I stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping inside. The space felt different, not because it had changed, but because I had. The walls were bare. The rooms echoed. But the air felt honest. I didn't rush to furnish it. Some things deserve patience. Mark's downfall wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Investors withdrew. Deals collapsed. His name became a liability instead of an asset. People stopped asking for his advice. Not because of me, because of the truth. Family gatherings became smaller. Conversations shifted. No one said my name out loud, but they didn't need to. Everyone knew. Months later, I received an email from him. One sentence. "I should have treated you like an equal." I didn't reply. Some realizations come too late to require a response. I kept the loft for 6 months. Then I sold it on my terms, not to escape the memory, but to close the chapter. I invested the money into my firm, expanded my team, and built something that didn't rely on shared walls or borrowed trust. On the day I signed the final paperwork, the agent smiled and said, "This must feel like a victory." I shook my head. It feels like ownership. Sometimes people ask if I hate my brother. I don't. Hate ties you to the past. I prefer distance. Because what I learned, what I carry forward, is this. No one can take your life unless you hand them the pen. And the moment you take it back, the story changes. Not with revenge, with truth. And that truth is louder than any lie ever told.